this a century later, when suddenly very large ships turned up. This is in the early 1400s, led by a eunuch Chinese general called Zheng He. And he brought these massive ships. I mean, these ships were really enormous. I mean, they are modern scales. And this huge series of treasure ships that came in the early 1400s that made voyages across through Southeast Asia to India, making its way to Africa. And there were a series of them, led by this General Zheng He, who was a eunuch incidentally. And it was not incidentally a voyage of discovery, because many of these routes that I was talking about were very well established, as I mentioned earlier. What they were trying to do was really showing who was the boss. And so these Chinese came to this part of the world, and they were going around essentially, one, by sheer scale overawing the locals. But very quickly they began to also meddle with the politics of this area. So they captured one of the claimants to the throne of Sri Lanka and took him back. And then they brought him back and then tried to place him on the throne. They may have changed the Zamorin or Samudrin in Kerala. They may have of Calicut, a Kozhikode is the correct word, I think, or maybe not the correct pronunciation. Anyway, so they may have interfered there. So they were messing around with the politics of various places, using their muscle. But possibly the biggest influence of that, however, was in Southeast Asia and the Islamization of Southeast Asia, which, as I will show you, was really a Chinese project. Now remember, after the 12th, 13th century, the Hindus of India became much less important in the trading networks outside of India. But the Southeast Asian Hindus, particularly of Java, were very, very active. And in fact, it was really in the 13th, 14th century where you have this massive expansion of the Majapahit Empire based out of Java, and basically took over a fair section of what is now Indonesia, even parts of what is Malaysia. And they were the guys who, when Zheng He was making these great voyages, were looking on all of this very, very suspiciously. And in fact, on a couple of occasions, they captured some Chinese envoys and decapitated them just to send a signal. It didn't go down very well with the Chinese, who then began to encourage an alternative center of power in a place called Malacca, which is in Malaysia, just north of Singapore. They had a king called Parmeshwara, who they encouraged to convert to Islam. In fact, Parmeshwara also visited the Chinese emperor, and they gave him a lot of money. And then, as a consequence of with Chinese backing, the kingdom of Malacca became increasingly more powerful, and the Majapahit began to withdraw. And so, over the next 2 centuries, there was a dramatic shift in the religious composition of Southeast Asia.